Hello and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Kamahl Santamaria. It is easy in a conflict as long and deadly as the one in Syria to take a bit of a one-sided view, one that pits a spirited but underarmed opposition against a government-backed military machine. The thing is, the stories are there to back it up. These are pictures just filed by Al Jazeera correspondent Sue Turton in Idlib province. People digging trenches and building bunkers to give their family a chance at surviving the bombardments. And then chopping down trees. It's illegal to do that in Syria's forests. But even as a man shouts, "You're breaking the law," there's not a second thought. It's cold, fuel has run out, and people do what they have to.
We are afraid we are breaking the law. It's a shame. People worked hard to grow those trees and now we're cutting them down. But how else can we stay warm? The water is freezing cold. How can we cook or wash or make bread?
But take that same theory out into the war itself for a moment. The idea of doing what you have to. How far can that be stretched before it moves outside the rules of engagement? Before it turns into illegal profiteering, looting, or at the extreme end, war crimes? That's what we're going to talk about today, the issues of ethics and wrongdoing which are splintering support for opposition groups like the Free Syrian Army and reminding us that this is still, although often lopsided, a two-sided battle. Before we get into that conversation, though, we're going to hear from a Syrian activist who I spoke to a little bit earlier. He is in the Syrian town of Darya, Mohammed Shahada.
First of all, the regime has always worked on spoiling the reputation of the Free Syrian Army and the revolutionaries in general. In some incidents of looting maybe or have taken place. But generally speaking, the Free Syrian Army members are fighting for freedom, are fighting for their rights, are fighting against injustice. They are not there to practice injustice against others. Maybe there are some individual incidents, but in general, they are doing the opposite. They are protecting people. They are protecting other people's properties.
They're doing all of those things, but you are conceding that some of these incidents do happen, but that it's maybe more are you suggesting it's a fabrication of the regime, that they are planting people, or that they are, it's almost a propaganda thing, that they're making other people believe that this lawlessness is going on within the opposition? Just
2 weeks ago, a video was leaked. A couple of months ago, the national TV, or maybe Adunia TV, it's a pro-regime TV, have shown a girl pretending to be raped by FSA member, and she was narrating how she was raped, how she was taken away, and so on. And they also showed the man, the FSA member, who allegedly raped her. But just 2 weeks ago, a video was leaked showing how the charges were fabricated, how the girl was told what to say. She was laughing, she was making jokes of the incident. It was all a fabrication. And
do you think the people of Syria are, do you think they can discern between the two? They know what's real and what's not?
I believe yes. Most people who came in direct contact with FSA members know that they are good people. They are trying to get Syria back to justice and to freedom.
We've got three guests to discuss this topic today, and here they are for you. Washington, D.C., first of all, is Rafif Jouejati, a spokesperson for the Syrian Local Coordination Committee. In Michigan, Barak Barfi is a research fellow at the New America Foundation, and rounding out the panel in Istanbul is Khaled Saleh. He's with the Syrian National Coalition, also head of the media committee there. So we thank you all for joining us on Inside Syria today. I want to start with actually just one question to all three of you. Just get a brief answer, 30 seconds from each of you, if you wouldn't mind. To see where we are, this looting, these claims of lawlessness, of taking the spoils from war rather than fighting for the cause. Do we all agree that it is actually happening in some way, shape or form? Rafif, I'll start with you.
Sure, it's happening in some form across Syria. This is a natural reaction to chaos that Assad has allowed to permeate the entire country.
Barak, a natural thing, you think?
Well, yes, I was in Syria a few weeks ago and I saw this on the ground. I heard it from many fighters. Basically, these fighters are unorganized, they're undisciplined. They're not part of any regular army. They are ragtag rebels, and this is what happens when you bring disparate people like this together under one banner.
And Khaled, your thoughts, your early thoughts?
I think this is isolated incidents that are happening in some areas. Natural results for The fact that Assad released tens of thousands of gangs into the civilian population. We don't have law and order. We don't have police forces in some areas. So it's, I think, natural for it to happen with all that's taken place in Syria at this point.
Okay, so we all agree it is happening some way, shape or form. I thought that would be the case. My next question, and again, Rafif, I'll start with you. Is it, and I use this word carefully, is it justified? When you're the little guy fighting against a big guy, it's David versus Goliath sort of thing, and as you say, these things are going to happen. Is it justified, though?
I don't think it's justified. I'm not going to defend looting or stealing or any sort of crimes, but we also have to understand the context in which this is happening. You have a regime systematically targeting civilian populations, universities, breadlines, and you have foreign elements and you have fringe elements coming in. These people thrive on chaos, and again, this is chaos that was instigated by the Assad regime. So no, I can't justify it, but I understand that it's going to happen.
Exactly. Maybe it kind of falls under that sort of grey area of you do what you have to do. You know, we've seen so many pictures coming through of people doing what they have to do, be it a civilian who has to, you know, steal firewood, we've seen, you know, just to keep warm and all these things. From any level, it's that do what you have to do sort of thing.
Well, when people are trying to survive, of course, in survival mode, they may loot and they may steal. They need to eat. They know that they can't stand in a breadline because they may be targeted by a MiG that's ready to drop the payload. So, of course, when we're talking about people who are starving or freezing to death because they can't afford to buy heating fuel, then yes, I think they're simply trying to survive. I don't doubt that anybody would do this.
Barak, let's come to you there in Michigan for your thoughts, because you said you've just been there, and I was reading your article as well in the Atlantic, I think it was, about the types of things you've seen. You described a situation of a man being arrested by an opposition member for basically not having the right documentation, and he landed himself up in jail. I mean, that is a good, clear example of what can happen when, you know, the law breaks down in this sort of way.
Well, basically, that's an abuse of power on the part of the Free Syrian Army, the FSA, the rebel group. But the problem is there's no causal relationship between what the government is doing by bombing breadlines and the rebels looting factories and stealing cars. These are people that are basically just abusing the power that they have to take whatever they can. This is not a case of people needing to buy bread or buy heating oil. They're stealing whatever they can get their hands on.
Well, let's have a little listen then, shall we? Just pause for a moment and have a little listen to the types of things that people are saying, because as you've just described about it, you've described what sorts of things happen. But the way that people react, the civilians who are out there, who I guess have put a lot into groups like the FSA. Have a listen.
The Free Syrian Army should be restructured and cleansed from bad elements who are working with the regime. They are robbing, kidnapping. This has to stop.
The rebels should get rid of the corruption in the city before fighting other battles in the country.
If this is our revolution, I don't want it. I am not with the regime. They used to oppress us, but now we are being oppressed 100 times more. Our country is being destroyed.
Barak, that kind of says it all, doesn't it? And, you know, to me, this is almost shades of Iraq, shades of Libya and all those things where a person, and we heard a person say it just then, saying, I'm not with the regime. But you know what? I'm not with these other guys either because they're not really looking after me either.
Exactly. I heard a lot of that in the streets of Aleppo when I was there. People basically want to return to normalcy and return to stability, and that is what the regime can offer. The rebels cannot do that. The rebels have not been able to replace the regime that provides basic stables, that provides basic services, and provides security on the streets at night. And these are the three things that Syrians are looking for, and the FSA is not giving them.
But they can't. Actually, I'll put this to Khaled. I'll bring him into the conversation here. They can't really replace, can they? I mean, Barak said they haven't replaced, they haven't brought in or taken the place of what the regime has taken away. But, I mean, under the current situation, 2 years of war and all this, they probably couldn't do that.
Well, remember that we are fighting a very well armed regime, the 13th largest army in the world. And I really would completely disagree with your other guests who said that the regime offers stability and security. I myself, I've lost many members of my family, so it's very difficult to tell me that the regime offered us stability or security. They prosecuted us, they sent my uncles and my cousins to jail for over 20 years. They've killed some of my cousins. The youngest of my cousins was arrested at 14 years old, so is that stability and security? But let's take it back to the point that we have right now. From the get-go, I said the regime released tens of thousands of gangs. And we know that the city of Aleppo was guarded initially by those gangsters, by Shabiha, and they're the ones who stopped any sort of demonstration in the city. When the regime decided to pull most of its forces out of the city, it was very natural for some of these gangsters to actually start looting and start really stealing some of the items. At the same time, I don't want to deny that some of this is actually taking place in some of the other cities. I was talking to a group of the FSA in Daraya, and they told me basically the city has been surrounded for over 40 days at this point. Over 12,000 from the 4th Division are surrounding the city. And the guys are actually having to break into stores, and they're actually this is the only way for them to get food. So do I really say that they are not justified? I believe I would do the same thing if I were in their place. At the same time, the funny part of this, they were telling me that they're keeping track of each item that they are taking. They're recording biscuits and chocolate, and we took it from this store and from that store, because at least their hope is eventually when this regime falls down, which is just a matter of time, they will go back and they will pay the money for this. So I thought it was funny for them to do this in the midst of the situation that they are in.
May I just comment on that?
Sure, go ahead quickly.
Stability. Let's take a look at the Aleppo University students who were locked in their exam rooms by regime forces before the regime forces bombed the university. How is that stability? Let's look at 3 million internally displaced people. How is that any sense of stability provided by Assad? 1 million refugees outside the country. I think to say that Assad offers stability is ludicrous.
Okay, Barak, you better reply to that then.
I just got one thing to say. In the 24 years since independence, from 1946 until 1970, there were 11 successful coups and about another half a dozen to a dozen unsuccessful coups. People would wake up in the city of Damascus and find tanks outside the radio and TV stations, not knowing which faction of the army now took power. When Hafiz al-Assad came to power in 1970, in the 30 years he ruled, there were no more coups. In 6 years, from 1976 to 1982, there was an uprising led by the Muslim Brotherhood. But after that, there was stability, there was prosperity, the businessmen could import goods, the industrialists were able to build capital. That is the type of stability that Syrians on the street want to return to. We're not talking about the authoritarian regime and the intelligence services. That is a byproduct and an offspring of the need for stability and creating an authoritarian regime. That is what we talk about when we say stability, and basically that is what people in Syria that I spoke to on the ground want to return to. They want an end to fighting, they want an end to chaos, and a lot of them believe that the regime can return that.
I think the comparison I perhaps made with Iraq before kind of ties into that, in the sense that people there who've gone through so much in the last few years might have been saying, well, you know, we didn't like Saddam Hussein, but at least things were a little bit quieter when he was in power. Let's leave that there. I want to move on to a couple of other subjects. Rafif, I'll come back to you, if you don't mind, in Washington, D.C. there. Is one of the problems, perhaps, and if we're going back to the issues, the central issues here of the looting and the lawlessness, the fact that there are many different groups there and that there is no sort of, if I can use this phrase, code of conduct between the different groups?
Well, there are a few points here. First of all, there is a code of conduct that has been signed on to by many of the FSA battalions. This is something the local coordination committees in Syria has been working very hard on with the Free Syrian Army. Second of all, we have to differentiate. There is the Free Syrian Army, which is composed primarily of defected soldiers and civilians who took up arms in self-defense. Then there are the fringe elements, many of which were brought in by Assad himself to create the sort of chaos we're seeing. Now, I think one of the people that was interviewed in the tape you had us listen to, one of them said that the Free Syrian Army needs to get rid of the regime infiltrators. So on the ground, they are acknowledging and stating quite boldly that the regime has been sending operatives to infiltrate the Free Syrian Army. I don't doubt that they are also responsible for many of the instances of looting or other misbehavior.
A couple of other elements I want to look at, because it is not just about looting, and of course it's not the first time we see Syrian rebels accused of violations. I just want to talk our viewers and I guess through a Human Rights Watch report which came from September. It claimed more than a dozen executions by rebels in Idlib, Aleppo and Latakia, saying that torture and summary execution of detainees in the context of armed conflict is a war crime, possibly a crime against humanity if it's widespread and systematic. Human Rights Watch then urged the military and civilian Syrian opposition leaders to immediately end the use of torture and executions, and asked for an investigation, not just to hold people to account according to international law, but inviting recognised international monitors to visit all holding facilities under their control. Khaled Saleh in Istanbul, can I come back to you for some thoughts on that? And do you think that people in the opposition leadership are really taking this sort of thing seriously? Because again, one of the themes I've got from all of you is that there is a sort of fog of war context here as well. When things are happening, when bombs are dropping, when people are under threat, these sorts of things, I'm not going to say these things just happen, but they can happen.
I do think some of these things do happen. We've been in close contact with the joint command of the military councils, joint chiefs actually. I just finished a conversation with them about an hour ago. The declaration that most FSA units have signed off clearly states that we must respect prisoners, we must treat them accordingly, in accordance with the international treaties. We believe incidents like these unfortunately happen. Syrians see the torture of the regime. They see 60,000 people killed. And I'm not trying to justify that, but unfortunately, in cases like these, they act incorrectly. And things like that happen. But what I've communicated very clearly with different FSA units, not only you should hold those who commit these crimes responsible, but in order for the world to respect you and deal with you, you need to stop them. And I think there has been a tremendous effort to stop incidents like these from happening. At the same time, the report talks about 12 cases, 12 different incidents. We cannot forget all the tens of thousands of incidents that the regime is responsible for, that are well documented. The regime until now refuses to allow international monitors to go to its security prisons. I think if we have free monitors, if we have human rights monitors, if we have free press going to Syria, a true picture will be divulged in front of everyone.
So it's important, just briefly, it's important that we don't consider any crimes committed by the opposition any less serious just because they are out-muscled, outnumbered, outgunned.
Definitely. I mean, I think I hold anybody who kills an innocent person or a person who's captured without a trial responsible for that. I think we all agree on that point.
Another element I want to look at, folks, and this is Al-Nusrah Front, because in December the US branded one group of fighters, the Al-Nusrah Front, as terrorists, effectively excluding them from future discussions. Now, this is a group which, in this conversation, I think is worth revisiting here, and I'll explain why in a moment. Here's some background, though. It came to prominence a year ago when it claimed responsibility for a suicide bombing on police buses in Damascus. That one killed 26 people. Some have linked the fighters to gunmen who used Syria as a route in and out of Iraq during the war there. Al-Nusrah leaders themselves have admitted to recruiting fighters from Saudi Arabia, Pakistan and Lebanon, Britain and France too. And Western diplomats have been keen to separate Al-Nusrah from the Free Syrian Army, but on the ground there are reports that fighters have been called in to support the FSA when it gets into trouble. Now, the reason I've brought this up, and Barak, I think you're a good starting point for this, because again, I've read this in your writings from when you were in Aleppo, the fact that a group like Al-Nusrah becomes more prominent and more important now if people are becoming disenfranchised with the other opposition groups. This Al-Nusrah Islamic group looks like a more attractive option, if I can say.
Well, the bottom line is the basic difference between the Jabhat al-Nusra and the FSA units is that Jabhat al-Nusra is not in the war for ulterior motives. They are there, the fighters are there to fight and bring down the regime. They're not engaging in kidnapping, they're not engaging in looting, they're not engaging in stealing cars. They just go to fight. That's the first point. The second point is I spent a lot of time in close proximity to the Jabhat al-Nusra headquarters, so I saw people coming in and out of their headquarters every day. These people come on a daily basis and ask for Jabhat al-Nusra's help to solve their problems. Other units have these types of offices in their headquarters, but they're disorganized. There's no one to greet them at their gates. There's no one to bring them into the office of someone that can help them. As opposed to where Jabhat al-Nusra, everything is organized, everything is regimented, everyone has a responsibility. They are straight shooters, is what people on the ground say.
Rafif, what do you make of Barak's description of Al-Nusrah there?
Well, I have to process Barak's description a little bit. I've just heard it. I will say that in many instances, Jabhat al-Nusra has been the one making the most gains against the regime, and in many instances has been distributing food, heating fuel, other basic necessities. So from one perspective, you know, people are receiving life sustenance from this organization. We have to take that into consideration. But I still believe that the Free Syrian Army and those battalions that have signed the Code of Conduct are the ones that actually represent the revolution.
Khaled, what do you make of it? Is Alnusrah, can I phrase it this way, is it doing something right? Is it doing something better or different to the FSA and to everyone else, and could be, well, followed a little bit more?
Alnusrah, what we know about them, that they are very disciplined. Obviously, from what Barak said, they're not bloodthirsty because, you know, they're treating people well. They knew that Barak is, I'm sure Nusra knew that Barak is close by and they did not do anything to him. They've actually helped deliver food and assistance to civilians in different areas. They provided gas in other areas. And in the midst of fighting a true terrorist regime, it's very difficult for me to understand why the U.S. chose to put Al-Nusra on a terrorist list. We don't have enough information about them. And what we know is that the U.S., by doing that, they actually increased the popularity of Al-Nusra Front. We're in the midst of a battle, and to try and take one group and really describe them as terrorists does not help us. And it does not really match the realities that we have on the ground.
Folks, we're starting to run out of time a little bit, so I'd like to get some final thoughts from each of you, and I think maybe a little bit of crystal ball gazing here. Let's put the idea that, well, in however long time, this regime does actually fall. We've seen in previous events, if I can call them that, in the Arab Spring, where there's been a void, say, let's say Libya, where there was the National Transitional Council, which came into there. Is there going to be a group, a coalition, someone who can come in strongly if this regime falls and make sure that the elements of lawlessness that we've talked about don't become big issues in any post-Assad time? Let's start in Washington, D.C. with Rafif.
Certainly, I think the Syrian Opposition Coalition needs to be further strengthened, but I think they represent the group that can come in and take over in collaboration with the Free Syrian Army as we transition to a civil state bound by the rule of law. And if I could add to that, I think the coalition would do well to take a look at the recommendations made by the Day After working groups, because those recommendations offer a framework for a smoother transition to a post-Assad Syria.
Barak, a final thought from you on that?
These are illusionary dreams fueled by Syrians in exile sold to the Western politicians in Western capitals. There's absolutely no way that the National Coalition is going to be able to impose itself in Syria the day after Assad falls. It has no legitimacy. It has no support on the ground. It provides no aid on a daily basis to the Syrians, and its representatives are not on the ground bearing the brunt of the regime's offensive. I lived in Libya for 6 months, and I spent a lot of time with the National Transitional Council members, or the NTC, and they had a lot of support in the east and also in the west. When the capital of Tripoli fell, I was on the scene within a couple days, and they had a lot of support there. We don't see any support in Syria for the National Coalition, let alone knowing anyone in the council, because in a city like Aleppo, there's no electricity to watch TV.
Well, with everything you said there, it's best we leave the final word with Khaled Saleh from the National Coalition. A quick final word from you.
Listen, revolutions are messy. We know that. The Syrian coalition is working very hard. We have representatives actually on the ground. We're holding meetings in Aleppo and Idlib in next few days, actually. I travel to Deir ez-Zor regularly. I'll be traveling to Raqqa very regularly. So we are there. We understand the pains of the people. Unfortunately, we still are short on cash. And the reality of it, we have a humanitarian crisis that requires billions of dollars to solve. So we are taking whatever the international community is providing us with, and we are giving it to the people. We're distributing wheat, we're distributing electricity, well, not electricity, but gas, actually, on a daily basis. Unfortunately, the international community has not fulfilled its portion and given us the support that we need. But still, at least we're amongst the people and we understand their pain.
So a big thank you to all our guests in Washington, D.C., Rafif Jouejati, in Michigan, Barak Barfi, and in Istanbul, Khaled Saleh. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what is happening in Syria, not just on this programme, but our on-the-hour news bulletins and online at aljazeera.com. I'm Kamahl Santamaria. Thanks for joining us. The news is next.